Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Berenger, Director of Appraisal and Description at the Maryland State Archives, and also the co-chair of the COSA SERI Education and Programming Subcommittee. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, which focuses on updating your resume for the digital age. First, I have a couple announcements. This webinar is our last one before the summer break, but we are getting ready to return this fall. An example of a topic we're working on is stakeholder engagement for digital preservation. Stay tuned to COSA's website, listservs, or monthly news briefs for our finalized schedule. The schedule starts in September. I also want to point out that COSA has lots of resources online. Check out our resource center, which has user-submitted content such as sample forms and workflows. Relevant to today's webinar topic, COSA also has a career headquarters where you can find and post jobs and paid and unpaid internships. COSA also has a YouTube page with plenty of great videos. In addition to copies of these webinars, you'll also find a number of informative videos developed by SERI. Check back often, as we do add new videos periodically. I also want to take some time to thank our SERI 2021 sponsor, Preservica. And before introducing our speaker, I just have one more announcement. Please note that we will hold all the questions all the way to the end. But if you have any questions, feel free to enter them at any time into the chat box at the right of the screen. So now let me introduce our speakers. Patrick McCauley is the supervisor of the Archives, Accessions, and Records Services sections at the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. Christian Skipper is the Regulations and Records Manager in the Office of Policy and Regulations for the Maryland Department of Transportation, and he previously worked as an outreach and appraisal archivist at the Maryland State Archives. Camille Tyndall-Watson oversees the Digital Services section at the State Archives of North Carolina, and Bonnie Weddle is an Archives and Records Management Specialist 3 at the New York State Archives. She oversees accession of materials regardless of type, and she currently co-chairs the SERI Education and Programming Subcommittee. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Patrick McCauley.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me. I want to start by giving a little bit of an overview of the electronic records program at the South Carolina Archives, because the development of our program kind of helped drive what we look for in the staff we hire and how we go about looking at resumes and job applications. Prior to year 2000, we were very paper-centric. Even though as an agency we were sort of going digital with our internal administration and our collection management. At this time we had an agency that was sort of top heavy with a lot of long-term staff members who started in the 70s. They were basically history trained and sort of fell into the archival field sideways. To many, their approach to electronic records was a sort of head in the sand model. Sort of, if I wait long enough, they'll go away, or I'll retire before it's my problem. We did have a robust microfilm operation, so what little direction we gave to state agency was focused on transferring electronic records to microfilm. We even had our own computer output microfilm operation going. In 2008, we first became seriously involved in electronic records through the PEDAL project, and this was a grant-funded 7-state project to develop infrastructure and procedures for the permanent retention of electronic records. Unfortunately, the economic downturn that occurred around the same time sort of torpedoed this effort, as our agency and others in the project lost funding and staff over the next few years, and the momentum of the project sort of came to a halt. The staff that was involved in this ended up taking buyouts or finding other jobs as our agency sort of hemorrhaged staff pretty rapidly over a couple of years. In some ways, though, the downturn sort of helped us get rid of that top-heavy level of staff that we had in the agency. So after we started recovering in 2012, we decided, especially our new director, decided we needed an electronic records program and wanted us to develop a sort of a robust one. And we had to sort of develop from the ground up. We did have a cache of materials from the Petals project and some hardware such as servers, but no useful procedures, processes, or experienced staff. So we put together a legislative proposal that the General Assembly funded that created our electronic records team. And we began to develop that seriously in 2014. And a major step was choosing Preservica to provide the infrastructure for our program in 2016. And what we learned from this is the need for flexibility, creativity, and a sort of dynamically written procedures, because they seem to change every couple of months with new programs, new software, and things like this. So nothing we do is really written in stone. We try to remain flexible at all times with the idea if it needs to be changed, then let's change it. And we also learned we didn't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. If another state is doing something, well, let's borrow from them. Let me get this. So our electronic team consists basically of our electronic records analyst who's with our records management unit, the electronic processing archivist who's with our processing unit, and the electronic records archivist who's with the digital collection imaging unit. Our team was designed to be built across units, and each member has other duties outside their electronic records responsibilities, but they discuss regularly the workflow, problems, solutions, and changes in procedures that pop up regularly in the process of handling electronic records. The purpose of having them cross the branches is we wanted them to bring other perspectives into the unit, from their units into the process, and keep the electronic records program tied to the larger archival and records management program. And our hope is to avoid this silo mentality that can often affect large institutions. So to reinforce this, the members of this team also have responsibilities that involve paper records, and we allow other sort of paper archivists to process electronic records. So this sort of serves as sort of the core unit, but we try to distribute the knowledge throughout the agency. And so when we go about the hiring process, where we're going for a regular processing archivist or a sort of electronic processing archivist or one of the other spots, we ask a lot of the same questions and look for sort of the same thing. So what does this mean for our hiring process and for what we look for in a successful candidate? First, it's always good to have someone who has a good background in archival and records management theory and the different practices that most candidates can get through the very good archival and library science programs around the country. The basics of appraisal, accessioning, processing, and preservation remain the same even if the medium is different, or that's the approach we take. We look for candidates that have coursework related to electronic records issues. We've noticed that that's not the same in all the programs. So if you're in a graduate program, try to get one of those classes. If you're past that, I know there's a lot of courses out there that are good to show up on your resume, showing that even if you're not working with electronic records, you at least have a background in some of the literature on the thing, on the subject. And what we're particularly looking for is some knowledge of subjects such as bit rot, program obsolescence, data migration, and the issues of proprietary software. And these seem to be a lot of the things that we have to deal with on a regular basis. Diversity of practical experience is another factor that we look for. As a small state agency, we're often limited by our salary structure and hiring new staff. So a lot of what we look for are recent graduates from archival or library school programs because they're willing to come work for us for the pay that we offer. But, you know, what I also like about that is they don't have in a lot of already built in biases or prejudice for working for an institution for a number of years. So they're more open to what we're doing. Plus they bring sometimes a fresh look at what we're doing. We look closely, or I look closely at internship experiences and volunteer work. We want candidates whose hands-on experience is varied and not limited to a succession of scanning projects, which is, I'm afraid, what some students look for when they think electronic records is, yeah, I've you know, spent 4 semesters digitizing paper records, and you know, that's all nice, but it's not the same as working with born digital records coming in from a state agency. And while internships can be hard to get and may not offer, you know, the financial compensation, which I know is a difficult proposition for many in graduate school, they can provide that extra level experience that can make the difference when you're looking for a job. Volunteer work at a local historical society or archives can sort of provide the same thing. In both cases, the idea is to broaden your experience, broaden your perspective. At least that's it in our view. I also look closely at candidates' non-archival experience and how it can relate to the archival world. Does the candidate work in retail or the hospitality business? Because that will give them the interpersonal skills that they need in the job, especially since many of our archivists also work regularly in the reference room. So that's another talent that we're looking for, not just their electronic or processing experience, but what kind of interpersonal skills do they have for dealing with the public on a daily basis, even though our processing archivists only do it a couple times a week. In my own years working in a warehouse in my undergraduate days has provided me with a world of experience in inventory control that has easily translated over the years into collection management. Database experience and knowledge from the business or corporate world can provide a background in electronic record issues that will help you. One of the candidates I had a number of years ago had actually done a couple of years working in the corporate world before he went back to library school, and his experience in that was quite helpful with us when we were first building our electronic records program. You know, so what I would suggest to look is how you can highlight those experiences in your resume and especially in your job interview. Since our staff is expected to work together as well as with the public, I take a close look at the temperament of the candidates I interview. And I have a number of questions that I ask to try to tease out how they deal with other people and with the public. And basically for characteristics, I'm looking for a balance. You know, I want someone with people skills who's personable, but I don't want someone who's over talkative. I want someone who has the ability to work within a group, but also can work solo. I like someone who's, you know, we look for someone who's cooperative, who can work in that group, but is also willing to bring up ideas and defend those ideas. So, and lastly, I kind of look for candidates that will demonstrate an initiative and an inquisitiveness. Do they keep up with the literature? Do they sit on webinars or programs not required of their coursework or their current job? Because that, I think, is really can be a key element in whether they'll do a good job for us and show the ability to move forward in this position. And then lastly, I'll just go over a couple of tips. You know, make sure if you're applying for a job, that you read the job announcement and know what the job is about. I've had a number of people whose applications I could tell didn't, either they didn't read the job announcement or they just ignored it. And I've actually interviewed a few people that when they started talking, it's clear they didn't read the job announcement. Do your homework on the employer, so you can be able to talk a little bit about what they are doing. So you show that you have a little interest in the job. Um, Note the hiring range, not just the salary range, but the hiring range. Don't be asking for a, a minimum salary that's way above what the hiring range is. I like candidates who are prepared to talk about themselves, and I don't want to have to sit through an interview where I have to kind of tease out every single thing and sort of beg them to give me an answer. Um, Show enthusiasm and passion for archival work. That's always a big plus. Uh, Archival work can be boring at times, so it takes I think, a special person to be able to put up with the boring parts of it to get to the exciting parts. And as I mentioned before, versatility is always a plus. Um, and lastly, I always encourage my applicants to ask questions. You know, ask questions about the job, ask questions about the city, ask questions about the agency. Um, that to me helps show your enthusiasm and interest in the job. So, and that's basically what I have. So I will turn it over to Christian.
All right. This is Christian Skipper. I'm the Regulations and Records Manager at the Maryland Department of Transportation. Just want to double check. Is my voice coming through okay? Just before I get to my spiel here.
Yes.
All right. Excellent. In that case, just before I move on to kind of, oh shucks, I have to advance the slides, don't I? Here we go. All right. So this is me. As Catherine noted, I was formerly at the Maryland State Archives, so I'm going to speak a bit about, kind of the winding route that my career took from college to where I am now. I'm often the odd man out in these conversations since I'm still involved with the Council of State Archivists, but am no longer an archivist by trade. I'm a records manager, but I do carry the archivist world with me. And that's been really important to my work the last 3 years at the Department of Transportation. Before I get started on that, though, I did want to just very briefly echo what Patrick had to say about flexibility and interpersonal skills, just before I get off the topic of thinking about it. As you'll see as we go through my presentation here, those are really kind of the points that I would hammer home. Flexibility in what you're going to do, and building up interpersonal skills. Just a quick note of warning here, this is my only slide. I didn't really have any visual aids or anything else that I thought were particularly relevant to my presentation, so I thought I would just walk you through what took me from college to the Department of Transportation over the last decade, and how that might be applied to your own working experience. So in 2009, I graduated from the St. Mary's College of Maryland with a double major in English and history. I had planned to go to graduate school in medieval history, having really not focused on US history at all. But since this was kind of the height of the Great Recession, really worldwide, I think we were all pretty risk averse at the time. And just getting out of college, I was especially risk averse. So I opted to try to get a job directly out of college and defer my plans of graduate school. As it turns out, I have deferred the plans for over a decade at this point, and am pretty firmly entrenched in my career now. So how did I get there? Right out of college, I got a paid internship at the Maryland State Archives, which was utterly serendipitous. The circumstances that made me aware of the Maryland State Archives were a class that I was taking in college, where we got to do some research there, and the archival staff made me aware of an internship in the interest of finding a job in my field, which, as anybody knows, jobs in the history field are kind of few and far between sometimes, especially during a recession. I did apply to that internship, and as it turned out, I found out later that was aided by an unsolicited letter of support from the professor whose class I was in that had gone to the archives. This has always stuck with me as a really useful reminder that who you know will always be an important component of gaining entry into places. But that's kind of only half the story. Who you know really hinges on how you've interacted with people. And in this case, demonstrating, a dedication to the coursework and strong interpersonal skills, strong group work skills, just in, an otherwise seemingly random class in college, helped me get that first job out of college. So it was really a matter of not being on at all times, so to speak, but being willing to put in the work even when it doesn't have an apparent immediate connection to career advancement. I'm going to be coming back to that in the future as well. So from there, I was an intern at the Maryland State Archives. My initial role was creating a web searchable version of a historical Maryland resource, the Brown Books. I ended up completing that in about a quarter of the projected project timeline. So my supervisors moved me. It was a 3-month internship was the plan. And so I completed that in about half a month. So my supervisors moved me along to a large scale digitization project. I had not previously had any experience with digitization. So this was a really nice thing. It was a nice benefit for just going whole hog at getting that initial project done. I was afraid that I'd be cut loose once that digitization project ended, but having formed so many positive relationships with other employees and becoming kind of an integral part of the special collections department during that 3 months made me a good fit to fill in gaps at the Maryland State Archives reference desk. Since again, this was during the recession, things had slimmed down a bit at the archives. And so, the reference staff was looking for folks to fill in some of those shifts. So while while at college only a year earlier, I had not expected to end up working on a reference desk at an archive a year hence, I took that opportunity the moment it was offered to me. That was going to be longer term employment, and it was going to be continuing to work in my field. So even though it hadn't been exactly what I had planned to do originally, going into, say, medieval history, it was of interest to me and I was flexible. So I went with that role. I was very successful working at the reference desk, again, those interpersonal skills. And that gave me the room to learn from my colleagues. So they taught me research skills while I was working on the reference desk so I could aid patrons. And that broadened my career at the archives out into helping with remote patron requests as well, because I became good at fulfilling the research requests. Both interpersonal skills and learning on the job. This was before I had the opportunity to do anything like webinars and so forth. I don't know if it was a different time or I just wasn't part of that world. But in the absence of that, learning from colleagues was really important. So anytime, a colleague is ready to teach you something, by all means, listen to them. Learn it, take some notes about it, show them that you're interested in it, and you'd never know what doors it might open. So from there, I wish I could remember what year this was. I'm sure it's on a resume from ages ago, but I think it was around maybe 2012 or so. I moved over into the State Archives Appraisal and Outreach Division. Funny enough, working under Catherine Beringer, who introduced this talk. That was just an incredible experience. That was kind of the making of my career, making over in appraisal and outreach. I had already developed the interpersonal skills, I had already developed the research skills, but what I was able to hone while in appraisal and outreach was an entirely different angle of the archival world, project management. So this was where I switched from primarily using kind of an interpersonal and English, the English portion of my degree, to using the history portion of my degree, and really digging into how records had evolved in the state of Maryland. so that I could better create finding aids and organize them. While I hadn't been trained as an archivist in grad school, again, working with my colleagues in the appraisal and outreach department was critical to my success. The more senior folks in that office took me under their wing. I would generally be assigned as an assistant to one of their projects. I would learn from them and sort of get passed around from project to project, and then eventually was given my own projects, at which point I had picked up the tools necessary, with the kind of software tools, as well as the knowledge of how projects were to be run there. Beginning around 2014, the state archivist tapped a few young staff members to start learning about major innovations in digital archives. And luckily enough, I had become well known enough as kind of a go-getter and somebody interested in modern records at the state archives, that I was luckily chosen to be one of these folks who got more involved with the wider archival world. So things like Council of State Archives, the State Electronic Records Initiative specifically, is what I was assigned to work on and join by the Maryland State Archivist at that time. So this led me to something that I would encourage anybody to do, which is attend as many industry events as possible. I was lucky enough to be sent to the State Electronic Records Initiative's shucks, I can't remember the name of it now. I should have taken down a note about this, but it was a 2-year program where we all kind of got trained in digital records tech. But then, there I'd attend conferences. I would attend webinars where, you can't always attend a conference, so attend webinars, join listservs, join as many groups as you can to help build a network of contacts around the industry. Because again, that's going to help you develop interpersonal skills. It's going to help you improve the policies and so forth at your institution. And it's going to allow you to help out others when they have questions. And that builds that wider network that will help you move forward in your career and improve your work. So while in this role, I got really interested and involved in modern records. A lot of the time, folks in archives tend to focus on historical records, which is great. That was certainly what pulled me into the field, but I noticed that there were fewer folks interested in the modern records, the PDFs, the JPEGs, the databases, heaven forbid, the geospatial information systems. And so I kind of carved out a niche for myself doing that, because I noticed that it was comparatively underpopulated. So that brought me into a closer involvement with creating agencies, or records creating agencies, as I helped them develop records retention schedules, which brought me into the records management world from the archives world. Finally, that brings me to the Department of Transportation. So I got involved with the Department of Transportation because I was helping them develop records retention schedules while at the archives. And then when the Maryland Department of Transportation really kicked its records management program into high gear, I was kind of a natural fit to lead that effort. So I applied for the job of records manager over there, and particularly given my background already working with the agency and having a relationship with them, I was hired on pretty quickly to that role. So most records creation agencies do not hire archivists to run their records management programs historically, but this is increasingly the case in the 2010s, and I suspect that will only pick up speed in the 2020s, just because the skills that you develop as an archivist in the past decade, especially working with digital records, most records at this point coming into archival institutions, and increasingly in the future are going to be digital records. So you need that kind of baseline knowledge of how to handle both scanned and born digital content. That makes you kind of a natural fit to lead a records management program. You're familiar with how these records persist into the future and the dangers that might exist for them. So I moved over there to the Maryland Department of Transportation. It was quite intimidating at first, since I moved from sort of a world where I was one of many people with records management and archives background to functionally a team of one, building a records management program from the ground up. But while there, I've been able to train various folks in records management at the Maryland Department of Transportation, and now I have an entire team across the enterprise that aids me in doing what I do, based upon my own records management expertise, and then their self-driven learning after that. So I've been really lucky, again, to be graced with a really great team over at the Department of Transportation, folks who are willing to learn. But a big part of greasing those wheels, again, is those interpersonal skills. The last bit here that I would highlight from Department of Transportation is ensuring your boss's support. This is going to be an important thing, for crafting your own records management program or working in the archival world, but also for resume building. Gaining your boss's support is useful internally because it helps get your projects done, and it helps build your resume by letting you get more feathers in your cap, so to speak. But moving forward, it's very useful to have the support of your boss, again, when it comes to things like letters of recommendation or those kind of unsolicited tips or that sort of thing to move you along in your career. If you are known as somebody who's able to get the job done for your boss or propose projects and then manage them, functionally, if you're somebody who knows how to get the job done, that is about as important a thing as you can be known for, really, in any career, but especially in a career like archives and records management, where securing buy-in from wider stakeholders is often challenging. So the major takeaways from this, I would say, be aware that not all history jobs are in academia or museums. Those are valid and wonderful career choices, but be open to other opportunities. Certainly archives, but even to records creation agencies. You could be creating the vast body of content that will become historical in the future. Be flexible, be patient. Be willing to learn new skills that you wouldn't have expected to learn to advance your career, because you never know what you're going to enjoy or be good at until you try it. Build relationships. Always do a good job. Even if it's something you're not especially interested in, you never know who you might be able to help through your work and who then may be able to help you in the future. Networks are key to advancing in this world. Finally, digital workplaces, and we're going to get into this with the following presenters, of course, as well, and Patrick mentioned this. Digital workplaces do change the tools that you use, but they don't change the basic skills that you need to succeed in your career, be that archivist-specific skills, things like how to organize collections or oversee conversion of files from one format to another. But also those sort of soft skills, interpersonal skills, flexibility, knowing how to talk to people will always be useful no matter where you are in your career. With that, I will turn it on over to Camille.
Thanks, Christian.
You're welcome.
See.
I said I'm turning it over to you, but I'm looking to see how I can make you the manager of this slide here. I know it hasn't even been that long since I did this. Goodness gracious.
It looks like Camille is now in control.
Okay, I'm
okay,
trying
perfect.
to scroll. It's not letting me scroll to the next slide.
Maybe the space bar will work for you.
There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that small technical difficulty. My name is Camille Tyndall Watson, and I am the Digital Services Section Manager at the State Archives of North Carolina. Essentially, in my role, what I do is I oversee our digital services section, which includes our digital preservation staff and the management of our digital repository, consultations with state agencies on how to best manage their electronic records that don't transfer to the archives, and also the digital access branch, which oversees pretty much everything that's front-facing and digital. So our website, our catalog, our scanned digital collections, that's kind of all falls under digital services. So I'm really lucky to work with an amazing and diverse group of people with a lot of different skills. So where I thought I would start today is thinking through when I was starting out in my own career, how I started building my resume. So I thought about what were the things that I was trying to leverage before I actually had any archival experience. And I have had, to quote the Grateful Dead, a long, strange trip through my career. I have been an actor, a dance teacher, a barista, an audio technician, a substitute teacher, a library assistant, and a number of random volunteer gigs along the way. And so when I was early on in my career, I had to think about how I could leverage that experience to get into the career path that I wanted to be in, to get my career where I wanted it to go. And so I had to think about things really creatively. For example, as an actor, I have public speaking experience. I've been acting since I was 7, so getting up in front of people and talking, that's something I'm experienced at. With teaching dance and theater, I had to translate very niche knowledge clearly to people who were new to a skill. As a barista, all of the customer service experience. When I was an audio technician, not only did it give me technology experience, but it also gave me experience with AV materials, which has been very helpful. Even in my own career now, being able to speak with like AV archivists about what they're working on. Being a substitute teacher gave me instruction ability, also problem solving skills, library assistant, again, customer service. So I just kind of wanted to point this out for folks who might be early on in their career, finding ways to leverage the experience you do have. I know when I was first starting to write my resume, somebody told me you should have the last 5 years or your last 5 jobs. So when these were most of my last 5 years, it was really important for me to be able to figure out how to leverage that experience. And the main thing I figured out from that is that soft skills are needed skills. Technology is important, especially in a digital workplace. I'm not going to say that technology skills are not very important, in fact. But the fact of the matter is that technology changes. And not only that, but especially once you're in the interview process, people want to know that you are somebody that they would like to work with. If you can do the technology part but not the other things, it might be a little bit more difficult to work as part of a team. So I listed out some of the soft skills that I think are particularly useful, just as some examples. There's so many out there. Communication, obviously, is one of those that is just to my mind, it's the most important soft skill that anybody can have, especially in a digital environment. A lot of times we are working across disciplines, right? In my position, for example, I'm working with our Department of Information Technology. I do have to work on the reference desk occasionally. I work with our staff who are less comfortable with digital materials, and I have to communicate across all of these different groups. And we collaborate with so many people. It's just an incredibly important skill. Writing skills, not only for things like if you want to publish, if that's something that is a career goal of yours or anything like that, but being able to document what you've done as you work in a digital arena. It's great if you can, write the best Python code in the world, for example, if that's something you're interested in. But if you can't write about how to use it and document it, then it's not as helpful to your colleagues. Conflict management, there will always be disagreements. That's just the nature of working with people. So being able to manage that. Customer service, because as archivists, we do very important work, and part of that is, and especially in government, is providing a service to the public. Problem solving, flexibility, all of these things are very important. And I'm sure that most of the people on this call, regardless of where you are in your career, have some kind of experience that you can use to speak to that. However, like I said, technical skills are still really important. And there's lots of different ways you can get those technical skills. I know that a lot of graduate programs are starting to add more technical skills to their curriculum, whether that's coding or databases and things like that. But I also know that it can be a little bit difficult to get necessary hands-on work experience outside of, say, scanning, for example. Or if you've been out of school for a while, your program might not have had as many offerings on digital skill sets. So I just want to talk about a couple of ways that I've found are really helpful in gaining technical skills. The first is online courses. There are so many free and paid options that are available nowadays. I know that myself in my role, I still do continuing education to make sure that I'm up on technology, and I absolutely encourage the folks who work with me to do that as well. You know, if you want to learn coding, for example, there's Code Academy. They have free and paid options. Coursera has a course for almost everything, and they also have free and paid options. You can also look to local universities or community colleges. Local universities can be expensive, but you can audit courses if you don't necessarily care about getting the credit, you just want the skills. And community colleges can also be a way of getting those skills without having to, you know, spend just hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can do, especially now in a post-COVID world, remote and virtual volunteering and internships are something that is becoming more common. You can get involved in professional organizations to help you gain skills. For example, I now have a lot of WordPress experience. The only reason I have most of the WordPress experience that I have is because I was the electronic records chair for the state, the local North Carolina archives group, SNCA. So you can use your involvement in those organizations to help you build some of your technical skills. And finally, you can use your own personal interest in projects to help build a portfolio for yourself. For example, if you're interested in writing and you want to put some writing out there, you could build your own blog and your own website and maintain that. You could absolutely, as long as you're, you know, writing about things that are appropriate for a workplace to see, you could absolutely link to that as proof of your experience maintaining a website. If you want to build your code experience and be able to say, look, I can code, you can absolutely say, well, I have an idea for a tool that I would like to see. It doesn't have to be fancy, you know, it could just be something small. But build that and put the code up on GitHub. You can get an account for free, and then you can link to that on your resume and be able to point to something to say, see, I've built something in Python or Ruby or a database, without having to necessarily have on the job experience, if that's something you're lacking. As you're building those skills, of course, you will also be applying for jobs. So I just kind of wanted to give a couple of tips that I've found really useful, and that I've kind of shared with friends and colleagues that they've also found useful, from reading the job ad to building your resume and cover letter. First off, with the job ad, that's where it all starts, right? The first thing to remember is that you don't have to have every skill listed in a job ad. You should have most of them. You should be qualified for the job, but you know, I would say as long as you have 80% of the skills being asked for, I think it's safe to say that, you know, you can apply for the job. The worst anyone can say is no, right? The way that I like to go through and kind of establish if a job is right for me, but also to help me kind of wrap my mind around how I'm going to build my application packet, is first of all to go through the job ad and highlight the skills that I have. You know, whether that's documentation or scanning or metadata, anything that it mentions that you can bring to the table, highlight it, and you can bring that into your resume and cover letter. Finally, the thing that I really like doing, that's my little like job application hack, is word clouds. I like to take the text of a job ad, not necessarily a description of the organization, although you absolutely can do that too, and put it into a word cloud. For those of you who aren't familiar with word clouds, they make the most common words bigger and the less common words smaller. So of course you'll have some kind of false positives of, archive, library, but it can also let you see a lot about how the person who wrote the job posting thinks about the job, what's important. For example, if you see collaboration as a relatively large word, make sure that you're really highlighting your skills in collaboration in your resume and cover letter. It's just a really quick and easy way of being able to hone in on some of the things that are important for whoever wrote the job. For your cover letter, these are some things that I look for as a hiring manager. Of course, can't speak for everyone. If I'm reading your cover letter, I want to know why you're applying for this job. I see a lot of cover letters that are like, I am applying for this job. Here is a summary of my resume. But I want to know why you're interested in this job. What about this organization do you find interesting? And more than that, what can you bring to this job that no one else can? What's special about you? Because every applicant has something about them that is unique. The cover letter is a really great chance to provide some story and context to the information on your resume. Generally in resumes, we try to be pretty brief. This is where you can kind of flesh that out. It's also a really great time to be able to talk about those soft skills we talked about and where you've gotten those soft skills and how you've shown them in your experience. I would make sure in this point that you're hitting the points that we've highlighted from the job ad. The word cloud can also help you reflect back to the hiring manager their priorities and help you understand what they value as an institution and as a manager. Finally, I generally suggest writing your cover letter first. That's just like my own personal workflow when I was writing cover letters and resumes. What I find really helpful about that is that it helps you really focus on your experience and understand what about your experience is most important for this job that you're applying for, which leads us to writing your resume. Like I said, when I write cover letters, it kind of helps focus in on what is the most relevant parts of your experience. Those relevant parts, I would list it higher on your resume, because as I'm reading it as a hiring manager, those things at the top of a block of text just naturally are the things that stick in my mind the most. So if it's relevant to a job, you want to have it higher. Where you can, provide concrete metrics of the work you've done. Processed X cubic feet. I did an audit of a digital repository that removed Y gigabytes of redundant data. Wrote X number of blog posts a month. Being able to provide concrete examples of your work really helps me as a hiring manager understand the magnitude and the context of the work you've been doing. Similarly, provide some brief context for your duties and accomplishments. Your resume isn't just a listing of your job description, right? It's a description of the work that you've done. And as a hiring manager, unless you're applying for an internal position, I don't necessarily understand the context of some of the description of your job duties without this help. So the example that I gave here is something that I just pulled out of my own CV. Created new storage structure for repository. That tells me the job description of the thing I did. But the important part of it that added that helps provide context to anybody reading it is in order to improve physical and intellectual control of materials. It tells a little bit more about the fact that I was problem solving, which kind of helps subtly bring in that soft skill there. And finally, bring in words from that job ad word cloud search where possible and within reason. I'm not saying do like a control, find and replace for random words in your resume. It needs to make sense. But it also can just kind of highlight that you're familiar with what the job posting is asking for. Because it does take a really close reading of a job ad to be able to add that in. And so next, I will hand it over to Bonnie. Becky, do I need to pass this over to you to control the
Actually, if you
slides?
could hand it over to Catherine, I'm going to be advancing Bonnie's slides for her.
Okay, I've got Catherine. It looks like you have control now.
Thanks. I'm Bonnie Weddle. As Catherine said, I'm an Archives and Records Management Specialist 3 at the New York State Archives. I'm a refugee from academia. I was working on a PhD in history, and I was several years into the program when I realized, A, that the academic job market wasn't going to get better anytime soon, and B, I don't enjoy teaching undergraduates, plain and simple truth. So I started looking at other things that interested me, and it struck me that the one thing I really did enjoy about working on a PhD in history was spending a lot of time in archives, and that I was always sort of interested by what archivists did. I started, I was always kind of picking apart finding aids, seeing how they were structured, learning to expect a certain consistency and structure from one repository to the next. So I started taking some classes in the information science program at my university. At the same time, I held down a job at a university press. So I have some publishing background. Started working on some short-term consultant jobs in the archives field. Took a part-time position at the State University of New York at Albany, and was ultimately hired at the New York State Archives in 2000, first as a description archivist. And then in 2004, the archives decided that they really wanted somebody to be an electronic records point person. And I applied for the job. It was a promotion, and I made it very plain that I didn't have a lot of background in electronic records, but I saw it as incredibly important that if the profession didn't get a handle on electronic records, that we were consigning ourselves to antiquarianism and irrelevance. So they took a chance on me. And what I'd like to do very quickly, because we are running out of time, is discuss some strategies that other archivists and records managers who have a considerable amount of interest in, but not necessarily a ton of experience working with digital materials, move into positions that do require more digital expertise. There's a lot of the skills that we acquire in other fields, as all of my predecessors have said, really can help us deal with digital materials. And the first thing that we bring are archival skills. What we do isn't changing. We still appraise records, we still accession them, process them, preserve them, provide access to them, but how we do our jobs is changing. And, there's been a lot of technological disruption. There will continue to be technological disruption. And how we think about concepts such as records, original order, authenticity, any number of things is changing and is going to continue to change. But if we don't have that firm background in archival theory, we're really going to be lost at sea. So all of those old school archival skills, old school archival theory is still useful. And you'll see throughout my slides, I've included some references to various resources that have been helpful to me that I hope will be helpful to you. New Skills for a Digital Era, which is a National Archives colloquium, contains a lot of really useful information that about the impact of technology on our jobs. Next slide, please. New Skills also highlights the need for analytical and systematic thinking, having the ability to assess how legal considerations, staffing issues, and existing ways of working interact with technology to result in the creation of records is incredibly important. Being able to take a look at and see how all of the pieces interact and work together is incredibly important. If you're in a records management position, advising records creators on how to identify and deal with bottlenecks and other issues. And I just want to emphasize that the sort of analytical and systematic thinking that digital records, digital preservation positions require are not limited to those positions. If you have experience moving finding aid creation from paper or a homegrown EAD system into archive space. You've noted how to do a lot of, systematic thinking about, what we do, why we do it, how we do it, what will continue to work in archive space, what won't. If you've been responsible for developing a digitization workflow, you've also focused on these issues as well. Next slide, please. The next thing I look for, and I should say I've done a lot of hiring just because of restrictions on who can serve on a hiring committee owing to agency rules. I've hired not only for my own unit, but I've helped to hire for other units as well. One of the things that I look for is creative problem solving. And one of the things that I think is essential to keep in mind is that, as Kate Timer has said, all archivists are innovators. We make creative use of the limited resources we have at our disposal. Solutions may not be elegant, but they don't have to be pretty in order to work well. So I look for people who can be kind of, creative and make the best use of what's at their disposal. Next slide. The late Bruce Barkstrom, who was a NASA data scientist who contributed to the development of the Open Archival Information System reference model, asserted that the biggest digital preservation obstacles are sociological, not technological. They're things like inability to communicate effectively, turf wars, and as all of my predecessors have said, it's important that, we were able to work well with others, to explain our needs and goals in ways that make sense, to work toward mutually agreeable goals. Again, these are skills that those of us who come from other areas of strength might have. If you have experience working in donor relations or developing a community-based archives, this sort of work is very, very familiar. Next slide. I also look for curiosity and commitment, independent learning. I think all of my predecessors have covered that very, very well. And professional development. I look for somebody who, within the constraints of personal life, professional commitment, devote some time to continuing education and are actively involved in professional associations. And I'd just like to say, if you go into a job interview and people think that it's odd that you want to be actively involved in a professional association, maybe that's not a job you want. Next slide. Another thing I look for is accepting uncertainty and change. In the digital world, absolutely everything is short-term. Solutions that work well today might not necessarily work well tomorrow. It also means that, we have the ability to accept that we might make mistakes and learn from them. If you're feeling like taking a risk in a job interview, you might want to highlight, this is what happened, when I didn't get what I wanted. Next slide. Kristen has already touched on this. Project management is absolutely essential. Again, it's not limited to digital preservation or electronic records management. There are just a couple of resources up on the screen. Project management for archivists, befriending your backlog, which does include some information about dealing with a digital backlog, and agility in the archives. This is really about adapting the agile project management method, which grew out of software development, to the archives field, but the literature review section covers basically every article that I've seen focusing on project management in the archival field. Excellent resource for anybody who wants to learn more about project management or highlight their project management knowledge in a job interview or resume. Finally, technical skills. My predecessors have all touched on this. I just want to say specific skills vary with position and institution. And if you're creative, curious, and motivated, if you can analyze systems, you can acquire technical skills. And if you're one of those people who has used Excel or some other software tool to create indexes, to feed metadata into digital imaging systems, you have technical skills, you can develop more. And with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I hope we have just a few moments for questions. I know we're running a little bit over, but I'm willing to stick around.
Yes, we understand if anybody has to leave, so I do want to right away thank everybody for coming, and thank you particularly to our speakers. I have to say, from my own experience, everything they said was just spot on. When you do leave, you'll be asked to fill out a survey. Please fill that out. That helps us out a lot. And let me throw it open for questions. Type your questions into the chat box. If anybody is interested in expanding their involvement in the wider professional community, as some of our speakers suggested, the SERI subcommittees are looking for members. And there are some different ones for different interests. We got one on advocacy and outreach, one on tools and resources, and one on education and programming.
This is Christian. My understanding is that the co-chair of the Advocacy and Outreach Subcommittee is just a really stand-up guy, and everybody should be eager to join his subcommittee. If only I could remember his name.
Everybody knows education and programming is where it's at.
Speaking of turf wars.
Oh, Veronica says not much difference between Sweden and the US. Oh, that is interesting to hear. But yeah, my own experience getting hired, working, and hiring others, I just agree with everything our speakers said. The importance of soft skills, particularly even if the job description or the job posting doesn't mention soft skills, I find that the workplace expects you to have those soft skills and put them into practice. And I think Patrick's description of archivists being flexible, being able to do just about whatever is needed also really reflects my experience.
Well, I would say that that's probably the biggest thing I've learned in my 30 plus years is you got to be able to deal with a lot of different things. And especially when we went through the Great Recession, what I noticed is the people who ended up keeping their jobs are the ones who are willing to take on other tasks that were not called for in their job description. And those that took the idea that, oh, well, that's not my job description, well, they somehow disappeared.
Very true, especially since certain job descriptions disappear over time.
Yeah. So.
And as Bonnie said, open to uncertainty.
I think we've all had a lot of practice at that during the past 15 months.
Oh, yeah.
But
any questions?
Yeah, I have noticed.
Put them in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, I have noticed. In addition to sticking around, the people who are willing to take things on are also the people who move up.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But you also have to make sure you don't take on too much.
That's exactly true.
It's a fine line. You got to be willing, but you also got to learn to say no occasionally. That in a nice way. That's like, well, I would, but you really want me to finish this other project first, right?
Yes, and a certain degree of strategic saying no is also really helpful. I just remember, my father told me that when he went into the U.S. Navy, it was during the Second World War, and during the intake test, he purposely flunked the Morse code exam. A, because he didn't want to spend his military career listening to a bunch of dots and dashes, and B, the guys who read Morse code were deep within the bowels of ships. And if the ship got hit, they didn't yank it off the ship. So he wanted to do something else. I do see Veronica has a question. What's the best free online resource for someone who wants to learn more about digital preservation? There are a number of really good ones out there. The Cornell and MIT tutorial that I included in my slides is one of them. And of course, the exact title is slipping my mind at the moment, but the slides will be up on the Council of State Archivists website pretty soon. Yes, it's digital preservation management, implementing short-term strategies for long-term problems. In addition, there are some videos on the Council of State Archivists YouTube page that Catherine mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. There's a series of self-paced lessons that are based on the Library of Congress digital preservation tutorial. So there are a lot of things out there.
I would also say, if you're looking for something more specific, like not as a general overview of digital preservation, but if you're interested in like different formats and everything, NARA and Library of Congress have lots of guidance on how they handle different formats. And for example, if you're interested in email, a couple of years ago, there was a clear publication on the challenges of email archiving and kind of the state of archiving that format. That is a pretty good intro to email that also brings up some of those digital preservation concerns if you want something a little bit more granular.
Yeah, Camille, those are great suggestions. And just for our international attendees, NARA is the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration.
Other questions? We're going to be posting the slides, and our speakers were kind enough to share their contact information, so you can make use of that. We just had too much good information this time to have a whole lot of time for Q&A. Okay, well, I guess we can wrap this up then. Thank you again to our speakers. I think it was really excellent information. Thank you to all our attendees. As I said, this is our last SERI webinar before the summer break, but we'll be back in September. So stay tuned to find out the topics, dates, and times. In the meantime, feel free to check out the online COSA resources like that YouTube page where we've been posting SERI videos.